Shackled tightly at both the hands and feet throughout a nearly 48-hour flight from the United States back to Vietnam, Melissa Tran said she felt that she was treated worse than an animal. That day was November 17, 2025, the day this woman was painfully forced to return to her homeland after more than 3 decades living in the United States. The image of her being escorted onto the plane, leaving behind the country she had long considered home, sent shockwaves through communities in both nations. Why was a woman who had legally resided in the United States for decades deported? And did she truly deserve such a punishment? You are watching Vietnamese Case Files. Today, we revisit the story of Melissa Tran, a Vietnamese-born woman deported from the United States, along with the hidden complexities of US immigration law and the fragile line between a youthful mistake and a lifelong consequence. The truth will gradually unfold as we trace this deeply unsettling case. Please note that all content in today's video has been carefully researched and compiled by our team from multiple sources. If there are any inaccuracies or details that require correction, we kindly invite you to leave a comment below so we can update the information promptly. And if you want to learn more about Vietnamese communities around the world, please like, share, and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files. Now, let us begin uncovering the first clues of today's case. Melissa Tran is the name used in the United States by Trân Thị Mộng Tuyên. Born in 1982 in Vietnam, Melissa immigrated to the United States with her family in 1993 when she was just 11 years old. Like many Vietnamese immigrants, the family started over from nothing. Melissa quickly adapted to her new life and later became a lawful permanent resident, holding a valid green card. Melissa's teenage years passed quietly in what many considered the promised land. As an adult, she built what seemed like an ideal life. She married Danny Dung Hoang, a Vietnamese-American citizen, and together they opened a small nail salon in Hagerstown to make a living. The couple had 4 children and lived peacefully in a modest suburban home. Melissa was well loved by friends and customers alike. She was known as a devoted mother, a hardworking business owner, always kind to her clients and deeply committed to her community. She even cared for an elderly, isolated neighbor, reflecting her compassionate nature. At first glance, Melissa Tran's life appeared no different from that of millions of diligent immigrants across the United States. She was a model wife and mother, working tirelessly every day to support her family and paying her taxes in full. Yet behind that calm exterior lay a hidden shadow, one youthful mistake that quietly followed her for decades, unseen by most of those around her. Melissa once believed she had left her past behind, but fate does not let go so easily. That dark chapter, once reopened, turned this gentle middle-aged woman into the central figure of a shocking deportation case. It all began in a summer more than 20 years ago. In 2001, when Melissa was 19, she worked at a local store in the state of Virginia. Naive and under the influence of a troubled ex-boyfriend, the young woman became entangled in a theft and financial fraud scheme. Specifically, Melissa was accused of stealing checks and cash from her own workplace and of taking part in writing forged checks to withdraw money illegally. The wrongdoing was quickly discovered, and Melissa was arrested for investigation. Faced with clear evidence, Melissa Tran immediately pleaded guilty to the fraud, forgery, and theft charges brought by prosecutors. According to Melissa's later account, her decision to plead guilty was partly driven by a desire to protect her then-boyfriend, the person believed to be the true mastermind who had persuaded and pressured her into joining the theft. Even so, the law did not accept that justification. In any case, Melissa agreed to repay the full amount she had taken and serve the penalty imposed by the authorities as punishment for her first major mistake. In other words, she accepted the consequences, hoping that after release she could rebuild her life. At that time, the US criminal justice system's response was relatively lenient. The judge sentenced her to only 6 months in jail for theft and financial forgery, since the losses were not considered substantial. This could be seen as a chance for someone as young as Melissa to turn her life around. After completing her sentence, Melissa left prison in 2002, innocently believing she had paid her debt to society. However, the story did not end there. Quietly but inevitably, another legal machine began to move, pulling Melissa into a new spiral that was even more serious: the machinery of US immigration law. What Melissa did not realize was that the moment she pleaded guilty to theft in 2001, she had unknowingly opened the door to her own deportation from the United States. For any US citizen, serving a sentence after a conviction usually means the matter is over and life goes on. But Melissa Tran was only a lawful permanent resident, not a US citizen. And in the eyes of immigration authorities, the offense she was convicted of fell into the category of a crime involving moral turpitude, conduct viewed as violating society's moral and ethical standards. For permanent residents convicted of this type of offense, US law allows them to be removed to their country of origin after they complete their criminal sentence. In other words, Melissa's 6-month jail term was only the beginning. Deportation was the consequence that would hang over her for many years afterward, but Melissa had no idea this was coming. It was not until an immigration court hearing around 2003 to 2004 that Melissa was stunned to learn that, legally, she had already been placed on the list of individuals who could be deported from the United States immediately after walking out of prison. In other words, the immigration court formally ruled that Melissa Tran had to leave the United States. Procedurally, after this ruling, Melissa was no longer considered a lawful permanent resident in the United States. Her green card was effectively revoked, and she should have arranged to leave the US and return to Vietnam as ordered by the court. Yet a legal paradox emerged. Melissa Tran remained in the United States, and in fact stayed for more than 20 additional years. Why did that happen? The answer lay in an enforcement gap, the US. Immigration authorities could not close at the time. Vietnam refused to accept citizens who had left the country before 1995. Melissa had come to the US in 1993, before that 1995 cutoff, so the Vietnamese side would not issue documents to receive her back. Meanwhile, to deport someone, US immigration authorities must obtain a travel document issued by the person's country of origin. If that country does not issue one, the US cannot force the issue or unilaterally put the person on a plane. As a result, the US government essentially froze the deportation order, meaning it could not be carried out, but it was not canceled either. Legally, Melissa Tran fell under an order of supervision, a status for people with a final removal order that cannot yet be executed. Under this arrangement, starting around 2004, she had to comply with strict requirements, such as regularly checking in with immigration authorities, reporting any change of address, and being ready to respond to any request from officials. With no intention of resisting, for more than 20 years, Melissa consistently reported as scheduled, never fled, and never committed any further violations. During that same period, Melissa opened a nail salon, raised her children, and lived an honest life like many ordinary people. Many around her did not even know she had a criminal past. As more than 2 decades passed, everything seemed so settled that even Melissa gradually believed the old deportation order had faded into history. In reality, her deportation order never disappeared. It simply lay dormant, waiting to be reactivated. Then, the shock arrived in 2025, when changes on both the US and Vietnamese sides caused Melissa's legal time bomb to suddenly detonate. In early 2025, under a new term, the US administration pursued a tougher approach toward immigration. They pushed Vietnam to take back even those who had resettled in the US before 1995 if they had violated the law. Facing that pressure, in February 2025, the Vietnamese government made concessions, agreeing to issue travel documents for dozens of Vietnamese nationals with long-standing deportation orders and committing to expedite new deportation requests from the USS. That meant the biggest barrier that had kept Melissa from being deported for over 20 years had now been removed. Like a domino effect, the legal process surrounding Melissa Tran began moving quickly. In the eyes of immigration authorities, there was no longer any reason to delay Melissa's deportation. The Vietnamese nail salon owner likely still had no idea that unseen forces were building beneath the surface. She continued her daily life and kept complying with her routine check-ins, just as she had for years. But her next check-in would no longer be as peaceful as before. On May 12, 2025, Melissa Tran went to the ICE office in Baltimore, Maryland for her routine check-in as usual, and was unexpectedly taken into custody on the spot. Without any warning, she was handcuffed and escorted away. From a free woman, Melissa instantly became an immigration detainee held for an indefinite period. ICE quickly transferred her through multiple detention facilities across the United States, first to a detention center in Louisiana, then Arizona, and finally the Northwest ICE Processing Center in Tacoma, Washington. This geographic scattering made it extremely difficult for her family in Maryland to visit her. In total, Melissa was held for about 5 months within the federal immigration detention system. During her detention, Melissa Tran endured extremely harsh living conditions. She said there were times she was kept for 5 straight days without a shower, without a toothbrush, or basic hygiene supplies. The food was poor quality, and at times, she claimed it even contained insects and maggots. These accounts were not just rumors. Melissa herself described them in interviews with US media after she was temporarily released. The fact that a middle-aged woman with no history of violence could be detained under such conditions sparked widespread outrage. Her family and the local community in Hagerstown organized advocacy efforts and small demonstrations calling for Melissa's release. A campaign named Bring Melissa Home gathered hundreds of signatures through petitions, and about 200 local residents even held a public meeting to pressure ICE to free her. Amid the public backlash, Melissa Tran's case was brought before the Immigration Court in Baltimore for review. Over the 5 months she was detained, she appeared in immigration court twice, as her attorneys petitioned for her release on bond while she awaited removal proceedings. Melissa's legal argument relied on established precedent. Because Vietnam had not yet issued a travel document, holding her indefinitely was unnecessary and unlawful, and case law provides that the government may not detain someone beyond 6 months if removal cannot be carried out. Ultimately, at a hearing in early October 2025, a federal judge agreed that the government was detaining Melissa unnecessarily without repatriation documents. He ruled that ICE must release Melissa Tran while deportation procedures were still pending. As a result, on October 13, 2025, Melissa was released from the ICE facility in Tacoma at 5 o'clock in the morning and boarded a flight back to Maryland to reunite with her husband and children. It was an overwhelming moment of joy for her family. After 5 long months in detention, Melissa could finally return home and hold her children again. However, this freedom was only temporary. The removal order issued more than 20 years earlier had never been canceled or pardoned, and Melissa was released on the condition that she continued to check in with ICE regularly and remain ready to comply with deportation whenever ordered. From that point on, Melissa's family and attorneys entered a race against time to find a legal solution to prevent her from being permanently deported. On one hand, they contacted politicians and sought support from the community. On the other hand, her legal team considered pursuing a pardon for her old theft conviction in Virginia because if the underlying conviction were pardoned, the legal basis for deportation could be eliminated. But this path was difficult and time-consuming, while ICE could act at any moment. And indeed, ICE did not leave Melissa in peace for long. Just 1 week after returning home, on October 20th, 2025, Melissa reported to ICE for the first time since her release. During that appointment, ICE officers placed an electronic ankle monitor on her to track her movements, treating her like a dangerous offender on release. Melissa's attorney immediately objected, arguing that the measure violated legal regulations, and ICE was later forced to remove the monitor. Even so, the atmosphere remained extremely tense, an ominous sign of what was coming. The situation escalated during her next check-in on November 12, 2025. That day, the case officer was absent, but another ICE official interviewed Melissa with a cold, intimidating demeanor. He directly questioned her about speaking to the media regarding poor detention conditions, saying she had not been able to shower, had been mistreated, and had been forced to eat food containing maggots and insects. The unexpected interrogation made Melissa realize that what she had shared with the press had reached ICE. Despite her fear, she remained calm and replied that she had only told the truth while trying to avoid a direct confrontation. But it was clear that ICE had taken note of the fact that she dared to speak out. 2 days later, on November 14, 2025, Melissa Tran returned for her next scheduled check-in, and this time, she did not get to go home. As soon as she arrived, ICE detained her again. An officer briefly informed her that Vietnam had issued her travel documents and that she would be deported within the next few days. During this short window, Melissa's attorneys fought until the very last minute. They argued that for the past 20 years, she had rehabilitated, built a stable family, contributed to US society, and posed no danger to the community. Melissa's family and several local politicians also spoke out, saying that deporting a mother of 4 at this point was cruel and unnecessary. On the other side, immigration authorities and supporters of a hardline approach insisted that the law is the law. From this viewpoint, Melissa Tran had committed a serious offense, had been under a valid removal order suspended for more than 20 years, and had already received full due process. Therefore, removing her from the United States was simply the enforcement of a lawful court decision. In the end, the government's position carried the decisive weight. All rescue efforts by her family and attorneys could not stop ICE from moving forward with deportation at breakneck speed after November 14, 2025. There were no further hearings. The removal order issued in 2004 officially moved out of suspended status and became a harsh reality. In the early hours of November 17, 2025, Melissa Tran was escorted onto an ICE charter flight departing from Louisiana, beginning a journey lasting dozens of hours with multiple international stopovers before arriving in Hanoi, Vietnam. Throughout the flight, she was handcuffed and shackled tightly to her seat like a dangerous prisoner, completely deprived of the freedom to move. Despite being a woman in her 40s, Melissa was not unshackled for nearly 2 days and nights, even while eating or using the restroom. She later described the flight as utterly agonizing. Human rights attorneys who learned of the incident compared it to something medieval in the 21st century, arguing that it violated human rights and ran contrary to the USS Constitution and international standards. When the plane landed at Noi Bai International Airport, Melissa Tran stepped off, looking gaunt, exhausted both physically and mentally. After more than 30 years away, she was suddenly back, nearly a stranger in the very land where she was born. With no immediate family waiting at the airport, Melissa quietly followed authorities to complete the required procedures. Fortunately, a distant cousin, someone she had only previously contacted by phone, agreed to let her stay temporarily. Walking out of the airport, the 43-year-old stood dazed, breathing the air of Vietnam, her homeland, which she had left at only 11 years old. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a family was left without a mother and wife. Danny Hoang and their 4 children in Maryland endured the hardest days of their lives. The 4 kids, the oldest only just entering adolescence and the youngest still in elementary school, were forced to adjust to life without the familiar care and presence they had always known. Danny, grieving his wife's absence, also had to shoulder both the father's and mother's roles alone to raise their children. Of course, the family knew Melissa had arrived safely in Vietnam, but the prospect of reunion was completely uncertain. A family friend choked back tears, saying it was cruel that the government had taken Melissa away from her husband and children like this. The kids had already suffered too much, and now they would have to keep growing up in separation. For her part, in her first days back in Vietnam, Melissa fell into silence. In her first letter to loved ones, written 1 week after being deported, she said she was devastated and heartbroken to leave the country she had called home for 32 years. She admitted she was struggling to readjust to life in Vietnam, where everything felt unfamiliar. Melissa also said she felt profoundly lonely, and that every passing moment ached with longing for her husband and children. But one rare consolation, she wrote, was that she no longer had to live under constant fear every time she reported for check-ins. For years, the dread of not knowing when she might be detained haunted her more than a death sentence. Now that fear was gone, but in its place was a painful void from losing everything she loved most. Melissa wrote that she did not know what the future would hold, but she was placing her trust in her faith to steady herself. In the court of public opinion, many felt that when weighed against a short prison sentence, permanent deportation was far harsher. A deportation order, they argued, is like a life sentence in exile, stripping away the chance to reunite with family and severing the life Melissa had built from her early teens into adulthood. Moreover, in this case, deportation does not punish Melissa alone, it also plunges her entire family into prolonged heartbreak and separation, where children lose their mother, a husband loses his wife, and the parting has no clear end date. Many voices have also raised a painful comparison. Why do people who have committed far more serious crimes sometimes receive leniency, while a gentle woman like Melissa is treated so harshly? For their part, Melissa's family and attorneys still hold on to a fragile hope. They are urging Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger to grant Melissa a pardon for her old conviction. If that happens, they could seek to reopen her immigration case and request that the deportation order be vacated so Melissa can return to the United States. Even though the chances are slim, the Vietnamese community and many human rights organizations are still campaigning for the possibility of family reunification. In the end, public debate around the Melissa Tran case reflects a fierce tug of war between strict legal rules and human compassion. For many, this case exposes alarming flaws in the US immigration system. For others, it simply reinforces the principle of no exceptions in law enforcement. Even so, it raises painful questions about how justice is carried out and the real-life consequences of decisions that are framed as merely following the law. At the same time, Melissa's story also highlights the thin line between enforcing justice and abusing power. Melissa speaking out about detention conditions, an entirely legitimate exercise of free speech, appeared to become a thorn in ICE's side, prompting the agency to move swiftly to deport her as soon as it could. Although ICE continues to deny this, other cases have suggested a broader pattern of retaliation against those who dare to criticize the agency. And clearly, that possibility is frightening in real life. Because if public authorities adopt a mindset of punishing individuals for speaking up, the law, meant to be fair, can be distorted by emotion and power. As we close Melissa Tran's story, it is clear this is not an isolated case. In recent years, hundreds of Vietnamese people in the United States have fallen into similar circumstances, deported after decades of lawful residence due to shifts in immigration policy. And thousands of other Southeast Asians, including many Vietnamese, still live under suspended deportation orders and could be removed at any time. Melissa Tran's tragedy is therefore a reminder to the community to stay vigilant and legally informed, and a call for reform so that the law can be enforced in a more humane way. What do you think about this story? Share your perspective with us in the comments below. And before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Vietnamese Case Files so you can keep joining us as we uncover shocking real-life cases. Goodbye, and see you again at this time tomorrow.